It's interesting when I nowadays work with people around fear, and fear is a very central thing in my work. So it's like me dealing with people and their fears is almost like my everyday business. Nowadays, a lot around fear that's coming up is really the fear of war and the fear of there is something like a disaster, like a global catastrophe, and I'm basically helpless. And I'm also helpless in terms of normally I can deal with my fears. I can do what I'm afraid of. I can face my fears, etc. And in this fear, it's such a global dimension and it's so globalized also in terms of where it comes from and the key players in these dynamics that I'm basically simply hoping for the best, praying, but not doing something more. And what I find interesting is there are so many arguments on the superficial level how we can understand that somebody is afraid of a world war or something. And still, if we look under the surface, if we dive deeper into the very nervous system, this sense of threat does not come from a world war or something like that, a nuclear bomb that is more likely nowadays than 100 years ago or something like that. It doesn't come from there. It comes from a heightened sensitivity of the energy system, of the nervous system, for something like a background feeling that has been here for already a few thousand years, maybe a few thousands of generations. So I would even say it's a compliment to the very person being afraid of a world war, because the fear is not about the world war. If we would have a person freaking out about a spider, it would be very easy for us to say this is not about the spider. And the person might agree. It might not be immediately possible to detach the fear from the spider, but we can agree on a rational level that the fear is not about the spider. When it comes to the fear of a world war, we have a few thousand informations or channels for information. We have arguments for that. We have, on a rational level, a higher likelihood or higher risk for war on an international level than 200 years ago or 300 years ago. That's something like it's undeniably true on one level. And still, just this information that it's undeniably true on the rational level, it would lead in a completely healthy nervous system to one thing: more presence and a deeper full contact with the very given moment. It would lead to more embodiment. It would lead to a deepened sense of pleasure for this very moment. It would lead to a heightened perceptivity in our senses. It would lead to deeper gratitude and appreciation for the given moment. That is what would be evoked in a healthy nervous system when it is about the real threat or danger or risk around, for example, violence or world war or disasters on a global level. So everything else in terms of there might be coming a disaster in the future, the climate collapse or whatever, everything else that makes us feel contracted doesn't initiate our contraction, but just brings it to the surface as something that had been hidden before in our collective and individual psyche and energy system in the first place. So I see on the global and individual level our, let's say, our being exposed to the fear of a world war and maybe to the heightened risk of a world war, the increased risk of global escalation, etc. I see that as a booster for our purging of those layers of fear and contraction that we inherited since, or that we have been inheriting since a few thousand years or generations. So it's, if I would have to choose one practical tool in order to deal with this fear. It's every morning, as your morning practice, you are getting up and you are shaking your nervous system. You allow your whole body to vibrate and to be afraid, because even if you tap into the sense of fear by imagining the future that frightens you, the future is just the projection of the echoes of the past, of contraction, of fear that have been waiting in you, for your presence, for your embodiment, for your vibration, from your past. So my invitation in order to effectively deal with these underlying background feelings of fear is using the story that makes you afraid in order to tap into the embodied vibration of frequency of this fear. But in the very moment that you manage to tap into it, letting go of the story in the first place. Because the story is like, that's not true. Like, it's a given that that's not true. Like, we don't even discuss about that being truly true, but we use it as an entry point. And eventually, every nervous system that manages to vibrate in full presence with those layers of fear that are evoked from these collective and individual narratives around being threatened or being endangered, every single nervous system vibrating in this full presence with this charge is on the global level a huge discharge, a huge release. So my dealing with my fear of a global disaster or escalation is a global imprint that will stay forever in the collective nervous system. So it's not a private, hysterical, over hypersensitive thing. It's a almost political statement that we embed in the collective nervous system. And in that way, I would encourage everybody who is afraid to be afraid in every cell, but to be afraid in a way that truly cultivates vibration instead of shutting down. I think that's the masterpiece. How do we use the challenging, frightening aspects of basically being alive and wanting to be alive in order to grow into more intensity and aliveness instead of using or abusing it for shutting down? I think that's the how do I not miss my life as long as I am alive? I think that's the masterpiece of a human life. Yeah.
Thank you so much for being interested in global transformation. If you want to join a very special event, I have a free invitation for you. Once a month, I gather humans from all over the globe in a so-called shaking event. It's a very unique adventure where you dive into collective trauma regulation and global transformation together with humans from all over the world. So if you're curious about a physical adventure that truly goes into collective transformation, then you are welcome to join me and hundreds of other beings, and you find the link for your registration below this video.